I'm here to sing.
Brielle laughed.
Sing? You smell like a dumpster. Get off this stage, cockroach.
Please, just one song.
One song, screech into a microphone like a stray cat in heat. They get put down.
Talia's voice broke.
My mama's dying. She's got 6 months. I'm begging you, one song.
The backstage went quiet. A cameraman looked away. A stagehand held his breath. Brielle tilted her head.
Fine, sing. Let the country watch a little hood rat choke on live TV.
She stepped aside like she was opening a door for a dog. Nobody in that building knew that the girl they just called an animal was about to silence every voice in that room. And the judge who'd laughed the hardest would be the one who couldn't stop his tears. God. If you think that was intense, just wait, because this story gets so much worse. And fried catfish, and something burning that nobody ever bothered to find. Talia Turner had lived there her whole life. A second-floor apartment on Lauderdale Street with a busted radiator and windows that let in the winter whether you wanted it or not. Her mother, Grace Turner, used to fill that apartment with music. Jazz, old gospel, songs she wrote on napkins in the backs of electricity bills. Grace had a voice that could make a grown man sit down and rethink every decision he'd ever made. She'd sung at the Blue Note on Beale Street before Talia was born. Small crowds, big talent, no luck. Now Grace couldn't sing at all. The cancer had started in her lungs and worked its way through her like a slow fire eating a house from the inside. Stage 3. The doctors at Baptist Memorial used words like aggressive and timeline and palliative options, which was their way of saying they were running out of things to try. Talia had been there for every appointment, every scan, every conversation where the doctor's voice dropped half an octave because he was about to say something terrible. She'd held her mother's hand through 2 rounds of chemo that stripped Grace down to 91 pounds and a whisper. The bills came like clockwork. Talia stacked them on the kitchen counter in order: electric, water, hospital, hospital, hospital. The hospital ones were always the thickest, $247,000 and climbing. Numbers so large they stopped meaning anything. Just shapes on paper that stood between her mother and being alive next year. Talia worked 2 jobs. She washed dishes at Gus's Chicken on weeknights, her hands raw and cracked from the industrial soap. Sundays, she sang in the choir at Greater Faith Baptist, where the congregation paid her $50 a week because Pastor Williams said a voice like hers was doing the Lord's work, and the Lord's work deserved at least minimum wage. Grace had taught her to sing before she could read. Sitting on the kitchen floor, 3 years old, mimicking her mother's runs and riffs like a game. "Singing is praying twice, baby," Grace would say, pressing her lips to Talia's forehead. "Once for the words, once for the feeling." Talia never asked about her father. She'd tried once, at 7 years old, and Grace had gone so quiet the apartment itself seemed to hold its breath. "He left before you arrived," Grace finally said. "That's all there is to that story." She never brought it up again. The only trace of him was a silver necklace Grace never took off, a delicate chain with a small pendant engraved with 2 letters, G and N. Grace. And someone whose name Talia didn't know. When Grace went into the hospital for the last time, she'd unclasped it with trembling fingers and pressed it into Talia's palm. "Keep this close," she'd whispered. "It'll remind you that somebody loved me once." even if he forgot. Talia wore it every day after that, tucked under her shirt, cool against her chest, like a second heartbeat. The day she saw the poster on the Route 42 bus, Voice of Tomorrow, grand prize, $250,000, she didn't hesitate. She called the number before she reached her stop, gave her name, her age, her contact. The woman on the phone asked if she had representation. No, ma'am. Professional training? My mama. Previous competition experience? Church choir, every Sunday. There was a pause. Then, auditions are in Nashville, next Saturday. You'll need to arrange your own travel. Talia counted the money in the coffee can under her bed. $63. A one-way Greyhound ticket to Nashville cost $58. She bought the ticket. One way. She'd figure the rest out later. Or she wouldn't. Either way, her mother was dying, and sitting still had never saved anyone. Voice of Tomorrow was not a talent show. It was a machine. 12 seasons, 30 million viewers at peak. A revolving door of judges and producers and network executives who understood one thing perfectly. People don't watch singing competitions for the singing. They watch for the moments, the gasp, the tear, the underdog story that makes them believe for 3 commercial-free minutes that the world is fair. This was season 13. The judges' table held 3 chairs and 3 very different kinds of power. In the first chair sat Lorraine Palmer, 62 years old, retired opera soprano who'd performed at La Scala, the Met, and Carnegie Hall before her vocal cords gave out at 55. She wore reading glasses on a pearl chain and called every contestant darling, regardless of whether she was about to praise them or destroy them. The audience loved her. Contestants feared the gentleness, because when Lorraine said, "Darling, that was lovely," and then paused, what came next was never lovely. In the third chair sat Victor Steele, 41, hip-hop producer turned television personality. 3 platinum albums, a laugh that could fill a stadium. Victor played to the cameras the way a matador plays to the crowd. Big gestures, bigger opinions, always entertaining. He liked drama. He liked tears. He liked contestants who gave him something to react to. And in the middle chair, the chair that mattered, sat Nathan Hayes. Nathan didn't need an introduction, but the show gave him one every week anyway. 12 Grammy Awards, over 150 #1 records produced. He'd shaped the careers of artists whose names hung in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. At 44, Nathan Hayes was the most powerful ear in American music, and he was tired of listening. This was his last season. He'd told the network quietly, no press release, no farewell tour. He was done. Nearly 20 years of other people's dreams had hollowed out something inside him he couldn't name and couldn't fix. 2 marriages, both ended by silence. No children. A penthouse in Manhattan that echoed when he walked through it. He sat behind the judges' table now, flipping through the contestant roster. 500 names, 500 headshots, 500 bios that blurred together into one long, desperate hum. His pen moved down the page without stopping. Turner, Talia, age 18, Memphis, Tennessee. No representation, no training listed. Emergency contact, Baptist Memorial Hospital. He didn't pause, didn't notice. The name meant nothing to him. Not yet. Backstage, the real battle lines were already drawn. Brielle Ashford, 22 years old, Juilliard-trained, daughter of entertainment lawyer Colton Ashford, had arrived with a vocal coach, a stylist, a social media manager, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd been told since birth that she was destined for exactly this. She stood in front of the mirror, warming up with precision scales that sounded like a textbook come to life. Technically flawless, emotionally vacant. But no one in her circle would ever tell her that. 500 sinners, one prize. And somewhere between the silk and the duct tape, the story had already begun. They called her number at 4:47 in the afternoon. By then, Talia had been sitting on a metal folding chair for 9 hours. Her back ached. Her mouth was dry. She'd watched 63 contestants go through those double doors, and only 11 had come back smiling. Number 341, Turner. She stood. Her knees popped. Somewhere behind her, she heard Brielle Ashford whisper to her stylist, "Watch this. 30 seconds, tops." The auditorium was bigger than anything Talia had ever stood inside. The ceiling stretched so high the lights looked like stars. The judge's table sat 40 feet away, elevated on a platform. 3 figures behind a wall of monitors and microphones and bottled water that cost more than her bus ticket. Victor Steele leaned back in his chair and grinned. "All right, sweetheart. What are we hearing today?" Lorraine Palmer adjusted her glasses and offered a small, warm smile. "Take your time, darling." Nathan Hayes didn't look up. He was writing something on his notepad. A note about the previous contestant, or a grocery list, or nothing at all. It didn't matter. Talia was invisible to him. "I'm going to sing Amazing Grace," Talia said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook at her sides. She pressed them against her thighs to keep them still. Victor raised an eyebrow. "Amazing Grace? That's a bold choice for a competition. Every church in America sings that song." "Yes, sir," Talia said, "but not like my mama sings it." The track started, a single piano note, slow and clean. Talia closed her eyes, and then she opened her mouth. The first note came out low, quiet, almost a whisper. It floated across the auditorium like smoke curling off a candle, fragile and barely there. The kind of sound that makes you lean forward without realizing it. Then the second note, stronger, deeper, a crack in the foundation that let the whole river through. By the third line, the auditorium had gone silent. Not polite silence, not waiting silence, the kind of silence that happens when 5,000 people forget to breathe at the same time. Talia's voice climbed. It broke open in the middle of "A wretch like me," not from weakness, but from something rawer than technique could ever manufacture. 18 years of washing dishes and counting hospital bills and sleeping on buses poured out of her throat in a sound that didn't ask for permission. It took. Lorraine Palmer's hand went to her mouth. Her eyes filled. Victor Steele stopped grinning. He sat forward, both hands flat on the table, staring. And Nathan Hayes looked up. His pen hit the table. His notepad slid to the edge. His face changed in a way the cameras caught, but nobody understood. Something behind his eyes shifted, like a door opening in a room he'd bricked shut years ago. The song ended. The last note hung in the air for 3 full seconds before the room erupted. 5,000 people on their feet, stomping, screaming. The kind of applause that vibrates in your chest. Lorraine was crying openly. "Darling," she managed. "That was... I don't have the words." Victor shook his head slowly. "Where have you been hiding?" Nathan said nothing. He stared at Talia, at the way she held the microphone, the way her eyes were still closed, the way her shoulders carried something too heavy for 18. He picked up his scorecard. 10. He didn't explain. He didn't speak. He just wrote the number and set his pen down, and his hand was not entirely steady. Backstage, Brielle Ashford deleted the video she'd been recording. The second round came 3 days later. Talia sang Etta James's At Last and turned it into something that sounded less like a love song and more like a prayer answered too late. She advanced. The third round, a group performance challenge, nearly broke her. She'd never sung with other people before, not like this, not choreographed, not with harmonies mapped out on sheet music she could barely read. But her voice didn't need a map. It found the cracks in every arrangement and filled them. Each night after rehearsals, Talia sat on the floor of the shared dormitory bathroom, the only place with reliable signal, and called Baptist Memorial. The nurses knew her by name now. "She's resting," they'd say, or "She had a good day," or, on the bad nights, "She's asking for you, sweetheart." Talia would press the phone to her mouth and sing, softly, whatever Grace wanted to hear. Sometimes old hymns, sometimes the jazz melodies Grace had hummed to her as a baby. She'd sing until the nurse said Grace had fallen asleep, and then she'd sit there for another 10 minutes, listening to her mother breathe through the phone, counting each exhale like coins she couldn't afford to lose. Brielle Ashford did not take defeat gracefully. After Talia's second standing ovation, things started happening. Small things. The kind that could be accidents if you were naive enough to believe in that many coincidences. Talia's microphone disappeared from her assigned station 30 minutes before the round 3 sound check. She found it in a janitor's closet. The next day, her only performance outfit, the black dress a church volunteer had donated, turned up soaking wet on the dressing room floor. "A spilled water bottle," Brielle explained with wide, innocent eyes. "These things happen." Talia wrung out the dress and wore it damp. She didn't report it. She didn't confront Brielle. She didn't have the time or the energy for enemies. "I'm not here to win a fight," she told the production assistant, who asked if she wanted to file a complaint. "I'm here to win a prize. There's a difference." Nathan Hayes, meanwhile, had begun acting strange. The other judges noticed. Lorraine caught him watching Talia's rehearsal footage on his tablet between rounds, rewinding the same passage over and over, his jaw tight. "You seem taken with this one," Lorraine said carefully. "Anything I should know?" "She's talented," Nathan said, not looking up. "That's all." But it wasn't all. After the round 2 performance, Nathan had stopped Talia in the corridor. The exchange lasted 12 seconds. The cameras caught it, but the audio didn't. "Where did you learn to sing like that?" he asked. His voice was casual. His eyes were not. "My mama taught me," Talia said. "She used to sing jazz. In Memphis." Memphis. Nathan repeated the word like it burned his tongue. He nodded once and walked away. That night, news from the hospital hit different. Grace had taken a turn. The oncologist moved the timeline up. 3 months, he said now. Maybe less. The tumor was advancing faster than the models had predicted. Talia sat on the bathroom floor again. But this time, she didn't call. She pressed her forehead against her knees and cried. Deep, ugly, shaking sobs that echoed off the tile. She didn't know that Willie Brooks, A 58-year-old stagehand with a bad knee and a quiet heart was standing outside the door. She didn't know he'd listened to the whole thing. And she didn't know that the next morning she'd find a garment bag hanging on her dressing room door with a note that read, "Every voice deserves to be dressed for the occasion. W.B." Inside was a simple navy blue dress, her size, brand new. The quarterfinal round cut the field from 40 to 20. The semifinal would cut it to 10. The songs had to be originals or deep cuts nobody would recognize. The judges wanted range, surprise, proof that a voice could do more than cover someone else's greatness. Talia didn't have an original song. She had something better. She had her mother's "Midnight in Memphis." Grace Turner had written it in 2007 on the back of a cocktail napkin at the Blue Note on Beale Street. Never recorded. Never performed outside that apartment on Lauderdale Street. A jazz ballad about the city at night, the river, the neon, a train horn blending with a saxophone somewhere down the block. But underneath, it was a love song, the kind you write when you know the person isn't coming back. Talia had heard it 1,000 times. Grace hummed it while cooking, sang it folding laundry, whispered it during chemo sessions when the drugs made her forget where she was, but not who she'd loved. Now Talia stood on the Voice of Tomorrow stage, under lights so bright the audience dissolved into shadows, and sang her mother's secret out loud for the first time. The first verse came slow. A voice like warm water over stones. The melody was deceptively simple, the way a river looks calm right before the current pulls you under. Nathan Hayes recognized it on the fourth note. His body went rigid. Both hands gripped the table edge, knuckles white. Lorraine glanced at him, confused, but he didn't see her. He was somewhere else. Memphis, 2007. A one-bedroom apartment with a clanking radiator and a window facing the river. Grace, cross-legged on the bed, barefoot, a guitar across her lap, singing this exact melody for him. He was 25, hungry the way young men are hungry, not just for food, but for everything. He'd been working the door at a jazz club on Beale Street when he heard her voice from the stage. 3 notes, and he was done. They had 14 months. The best 14 months of his life. A fact he'd never admit to anyone. Grace sang, Nathan dreamed. They were too young and too broke and too alive to see the cliff ahead. The Nashville label called in December. 1 shot. Junior producer. Leave immediately. Grace told him she was pregnant the night before his bus. Standing in the doorway, one hand on the frame, one on her stomach. Not crying. Watching him the way you watch someone choose between 2 doors when you already know which one they'll pick. He picked Nashville, said he'd come back, said it with his hand on her face and his bag already packed and his eyes already past her toward the highway. He didn't come back. Changed his number 6 weeks later, told himself it was temporary, then necessary, then stopped telling himself anything at all, and buried Memphis under 12 Grammys and 2 divorces and a penthouse with no photographs on the walls. Now that melody was coming out of an 18-year-old girl on national television. The same phrasing, the same breath patterns, the same crack on the word gone that Grace used to do because she meant it. Nathan stood, his chair scraped back. 20 million viewers watched his face drain. The song ended. The audience erupted. Talia opened her eyes and smiled, a real smile, the kind she hadn't worn in months, because she felt her mother in every note. Nathan didn't clap. He walked off set, down the corridor, into the men's room, gripped the sink with both hands, and stared at his reflection, the face of a man who had everything except the one thing he'd thrown away. He pulled out his phone, typed, Grace Turner, Memphis Hospital. Results in 0.3 seconds. A GoFundMe with $1,200 raised. A photo of Grace, thin, hollow, still beautiful, in a hospital bed. And next to her, grinning in a Christmas photo, a girl with Grace's smile and Nathan's eyes. He sank to the floor. The phone screen glowed against his face. God, he whispered, what did I do? Bro, 18. She's 18.
And she's singing a song
Her dying mama wrote, for the man who ghosted them. And that man? He's sitting right there, judging her. Imagine finding out your judge is the father who never showed up. I can't. The video hit the internet before Talia left the stage. Not the performance. That went viral too. 4 million views overnight. The other one. Posted from a burner account at 11:47 p.m. with the caption, Is Voice of Tomorrow rigging results for a sob story? Hashtag pity vote. Hashtag not talent, just tears. The clip was a mashup. Talia's hospital backstory, pulled from a backstage interview, spliced next to her standing ovations. The implication was surgical. She wasn't winning because she could sing. She was winning because she was sad. By morning, hashtag pity vote was trending in 14 states. Comment sections turned into war zones. Half the internet defended Talia. The other half called her a fraud, a charity case, a girl weaponizing her mother's cancer for prize money. Talia read every comment at 3 a.m., blue phone light painting shadows across the dormitory ceiling. She knew she shouldn't scroll. She couldn't stop. Each word landed like a stone dropped into water that was already rising. She's playing the judges. Classic manipulation. Bet her mom isn't even that sick. This is a singing competition, not a GoFundMe. The production team called an emergency meeting at 8 the next morning. 4 executives, 2 lawyers, and a PR consultant crowded around a conference table debating whether Talia Turner was a liability or an asset. The optics are problematic, the consultant said, tapping a pen against her tablet. Keep her and she wins. Half the audience cries rigged. Cut her. The other half says we punished a dying woman's daughter for being poor. Nathan Hayes walked into that meeting uninvited. He'd heard about it from a sound engineer who owed him a favor. He sat at the end of the table without asking and said 6 words that ended the discussion. Her voice speaks for itself. Period. Lorraine Palmer, joining by speakerphone from her hotel, backed him up without hesitation. I've judged competitions on 4 continents. That girl is the most naturally gifted vocalist I've heard in 20 years. Her personal circumstances are irrelevant to her instrument. Victor Steele shrugged. Keep her. The drama's good for ratings anyway. Talia stayed, but the damage had already burrowed in. She stopped eating in the shared cafeteria, stopped making eye contact with other contestants in the hallways. She rehearsed alone now, in a practice room at the end of the hall, with the door locked. The navy dress from Willie Brooks hung on the back of the door like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. That evening she called Baptist Memorial. The nurse's voice was different this time. Softer, careful, the way people speak when they're holding something that might break. Your mama had a rough day, honey. She's stable now, but she's been asking for you." They held the phone to Grace's ear. Talia could hear her mother's breathing, thin, shallow, labored. The sound of lungs fighting a war they were slowly losing. "Mama, I don't know if I can do this." A long pause. Then Grace's voice, barely there, like wind slipping through a cracked window. "Sing, baby. Just sing." Talia hung up, sat on the cold floor, stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. Then she looked down at the necklace resting against her collarbone. Silver chain, small pendant, 2 letters she'd never understood. G and N. She'd almost quit, almost walked to the airport, almost bought whatever ticket would carry her back to Memphis and her mother's bedside where she belonged. But Grace said sing. So she'd sing. She stood up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, walked back to the rehearsal room. 3 floors above, Nathan Hayes sat alone in his hotel room, watching backstage security footage on his laptop. He saw Talia walking down the corridor, saw the necklace swing forward and catch the fluorescent light, saw the letters G and N. His hand covered his mouth. His chest caved inward like something structural had given way. He'd bought that necklace on Beale Street for $37 the night he told Grace Turner he loved her. Nathan Hayes didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his hotel room with the curtains drawn and the minibar untouched and the security footage frozen on his laptop screen. The image glowed. Talia in the corridor, mid-stride, the necklace catching light. G and N. Grace and Nathan. $37 at a jewelry kiosk on Beale Street, winter of 2007, because he couldn't afford a ring, but wanted her to have something real. He closed the laptop, opened it again, closed it. The memories came whether he wanted them or not. Grace, at 23, hair in twists, laughing at something he'd said that wasn't even funny, laughing because she was happy, and happiness made her generous with everything, even her laughter. The apartment smelled like garlic and cheap red wine, and the vanilla candle she burned on the windowsill because it made the place feel like somewhere instead of nowhere. They'd talk until 2 a.m. about everything. Music, God, whether aliens were real, what they'd name their kids. Grace wanted a daughter. She'd already picked the name. Talia. Found it in a baby name book at the library and circled it in pencil. "It means dew from heaven," she'd said. Nathan remembered laughing. "We're 25. We're not having kids." Grace had smiled. That knowing, patient smile she wore when he said something she'd already seen through. "We'll see." She was right. She was always right. And he punished her for it by disappearing. The Nashville years blurred together. Junior producer to senior producer to corner office to the penthouse on Music Row. Every rung of the ladder another mile from Memphis. He told himself the distance was geography. It wasn't. It was cowardice compressed into a career. 2 marriages came and went. The second one ended because Elaine found a letter he'd written to Grace at 3 a.m. and never sent. 6 pages in his handwriting that said everything he'd been too afraid to say out loud. No children. Not from lack of opportunity, but from a locked room inside him he refused to open. Because he knew what was in there. A girl named Talia. A debt he could never repay. He called his assistant at midnight. Everything on Grace Turner, Memphis, Baptist Memorial Hospital, medical records, bills, all of it. The file arrived at 6 a.m. He read it sitting on the bathroom floor because his hands shook too badly to hold the phone at the desk.
Stage 3 lung cancer. 2 rounds of chemo. 1 failed clinical trial. Outstanding balance, $247,000. Insurance, none. Emergency contact, Talia Turner, daughter. No father listed. No other family. Just an 18-year-old girl and a stack of bills taller than hope.
He scrolled to the photos. Grace in the hospital bed. 61 pounds. Tubes in her arms. A scarf on her head. And eyes that still, after everything he'd done and everything he'd failed to do, looked like they were waiting for someone to walk through the door. Nathan set the phone down, walked to the bathroom mirror. 44 years old. 12 Grammys on a shelf in Manhattan. A net worth that could pay Grace's hospital bills 40 times over without noticing. He'd had the money for years. Could have found her at any point. Could have typed her name into a search bar and fixed everything with 1 phone call and 1 wire transfer. But that would have meant admitting he was wrong. And Nathan Hayes had built his entire identity on never being wrong. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. He deserved worse than cold glass.
I'm going to fix this, he whispered to his own reflection. But not yet. Not until she earns it herself. She deserves that much. It was the first honest thing he'd said in 19 years. It was also, he suspected, the last selfish thing he'd allow himself. Semi-final night. 10 contestants. 3 would survive. The rest would go home with nothing but a story about the time they almost made it. The auditorium hummed with the kind of electricity that comes when every person in a room knows they're about to witness something that matters. Seats full, cameras hot. A director in the control booth whispering into his headset. This is the episode people talk about. Brielle Ashford went first. She walked onto that stage like she owned it. Her vocal coach had spent weeks drilling a Whitney Houston arrangement that showcased every technical weapon in her arsenal. Runs, riffs, key changes that landed like fireworks. The audience clapped on cue. The judges nodded appreciatively. It was perfect. Polished. The kind of performance you admire the way you admire a well-made machine. Precisely engineered and completely forgettable. Lorraine gave a 9. Victor gave a 9. Nathan, distracted, distant, gave an 8 without explanation. Elijah Crawford went second. 21. Factory worker from Akron, Ohio. Tenor voice like sunlight filtered through amber glass. He sang an original ballad about his grandmother who'd raised him after his parents went to prison. Raw. Real. The kind of honest that makes people look at their hands because eye contact feels too intimate. 3 9s. Elijah walked off stage breathing like he'd been underwater for 4 minutes. Then the lights dropped. A single spotlight found center stage. Talia Turner stepped into it, wearing the navy blue dress from Willie Brooks, the silver necklace resting against her collarbone, and an expression that wasn't fear and wasn't confidence. Something older than both. Purpose. She'd chosen Hallelujah, but not the version anyone knew. She'd rearranged it in her mother's style. Jazz phrasing, blues undertones, the melody bent and stretched until it sounded less like a hymn and more like a confession whispered to God. The first verse came quiet, almost conversational,
like she was telling you a secret in a room full of strangers and somehow making it feel private.
The second verse opened up. Her voice climbed, not in volume, but in depth. Each note carried more weight than the last, the song descending into something real and pulling every person in that auditorium down with it. Midway through the third verse, her voice cracked. Not technique failing, something breaking open that she'd been holding shut for weeks. Tears slid down her face. Her hands trembled on the microphone. But the voice didn't falter. It got stronger. The crack became a canyon, and out of it poured everything. The hospital bills, and the bus rides, and the soaking wet dress, and the 3 a.m. phone calls, and a mother who whispered, "Sing," because it was the only word she had the strength to say. 5,000 people stood, not one at a time, all at once, like a wave hitting a wall. Nathan, red-eyed, jaw locked, looked at the scorecard in front of him, wrote a number, held it up. 10. His voice through the microphone was rough. "I've been in this industry nearly 20 years, produced legends, Grammy winners, Hall of Famers." He paused, swallowed hard. "I've never heard anything like what I just heard." Top 3 announced: Brielle Ashford, Elijah Crawford, Talia Turner. The finale was set, and Nathan Hayes was running out of time to decide what kind of man he was going to be. The night of the finale, 22 million people tuned in. The grand old auditorium had been transformed. New lighting rigs hung from the ceiling like constellations made of steel and glass. The judges' table gleamed under a fresh coat of lacquer. Red velvet draped the walls. Everything about the room said, "This is where history happens." Backstage, 3 contestants prepared in 3 very different ways. Brielle Ashford sat in front of a mirror ringed with lights, while her stylist pinned every strand of hair into mathematical precision. Her vocal coach ran her through breathing exercises. Her social media manager scheduled posts for every 15-minute interval of the broadcast. She was ready. She'd been ready since birth. Elijah Crawford paced a narrow corridor with his earbuds in, eyes closed, mouthing the words of his song. His hands were shaking. He called his grandmother, who told him the same thing she'd told him every day of his life. "You already won, baby. Everything else is gravy." And Talia Turner sat on the floor of the dressing room with her phone pressed to her ear, listening to silence. The nurse at Baptist Memorial had placed the phone on Grace's pillow. Grace was too weak to hold it, too weak to speak in full sentences. Her breathing came in thin, ragged intervals that sounded like paper tearing slowly. "Mama," Talia whispered, "I'm going on soon." A pause. A breath. Then Grace's voice, so faint the phone's microphone almost couldn't catch it. "Sing our song, baby." Our song. The one Grace wrote and never named. The one she hummed in the kitchen and whispered during chemo and sang to the ceiling when she thought Talia was asleep. The song about a man who left and a woman who stayed, and a love that refused to disappear even when it had every reason to. Talia had never performed it publicly. She'd sung Midnight in Memphis, but that was the city song, the jazz ballad. This one was different. This one was the wound, the raw, open, unhealed wound that Grace Turner had carried for 19 years and turned into melody because melody was the only language that didn't require explanation. "I will, Mama," Talia said. "I promise." She hung up, pressed the phone against her forehead, breathed. Then she stood, smoothed the navy dress, touched the necklace at her throat, and walked toward the stage. Brielle performed first, a powerhouse rendition of Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You that hit every technical mark with surgical accuracy. The audience cheered. The judges scored high, 9, 9, 8.5. Brielle took her bow and walked off stage with the satisfied expression of someone who believed she'd just won. Elijah went second. His original song, Hands Like Hers, brought the audience to tears. His grandmother's hands, working hands, hands that held him when nobody else would. He sang it with his eyes closed and his fists clenched and his voice breaking in all the right places. Scores, 9, 9.5, 9. Then the auditorium went dark. Not dim, dark. Every light in the building cut at once. 22 million viewers saw their screens go black for 3 full seconds, long enough to wonder if something had gone wrong. A single spotlight hit the stage, white, sharp, a circle of light no bigger than a kitchen table. Talia walked into it. No introduction, no backing track, no music at all. She opened her mouth and sang her mother's unnamed song a cappella into a silent auditorium. The melody started in a register so low it felt like a vibration more than a sound, something you sensed in your ribs before your ears understood it. A lullaby, pitched for the end of the world. The words told a simple story. A woman in a small apartment, a man who promised to stay, a door closing at dawn, a child growing inside her who would never know the sound of his voice. And despite all of it, despite the betrayal and the silence and the years of nothing, a refusal to stop loving. Not forgiveness, not weakness, just a stubborn, immovable choice to keep the light on in case he ever found his way back. Talia sang it the way her mother sang it, with her eyes closed and her chin tilted slightly up, as if the words were going somewhere higher than the ceiling. Her voice filled every corner of that auditorium. It settled into the spaces between people. It made strangers reach for each other's hands. At the judges' table, Lorraine Palmer wept openly, both hands covering her face. Victor Steele sat perfectly still, his usual showmanship stripped away, his eyes fixed on the stage like he was witnessing something he didn't have the vocabulary to describe. And Nathan Hayes recognized every word. He recognized the melody he'd heard through a thin wall in Memphis. He recognized the breath pattern Grace used when she was singing something that mattered. He recognized the pause before the final verse. The pause where Grace always swallowed hard because the next line was the one about the baby. His hands gripped the edge of the table. His face, broadcast to 22 million screens, shifted from composure to recognition to devastation in the space of 4 seconds. The final note left Talia's mouth and rose into the rafters and hung there, suspended, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Silence. 5 full seconds of absolute silence. Then the auditorium exploded. Every person on their feet. The sound was physical, a wall of noise that hit the stage like a wave. People were crying, screaming, holding their phones up to capture something that no screen could ever fully hold. Nathan stood. His chair fell backward. His microphone was live. And before anyone on the production team could cut the feed, his voice cracked through the speakers. That song. I know that song. The auditorium went quiet. 22 million people leaned closer to their screens. Nathan's eyes were locked on Talia. His face was wet. His hands hung at his sides.
I know that song, he said again, and his voice broke on the last word like a man stepping off a ledge he'd been standing on for 19 years. Nathan Hayes stepped down from the judge's platform. In 13 seasons of Voice of Tomorrow, no judge had ever left their chair during a live broadcast. The protocol was absolute. Judges sit, judges score, judges comment. The stage belongs to the contestants. The table belongs to the judges. The line between them is not crossed. Nathan crossed it.
The production director screamed into his headset. "What is he doing? Cut to commercial! Cut to!" But the executive producer overruled him with a single raised hand. 22 million viewers. You don't cut away from 22 million viewers. You ride it. Nathan walked past the monitors, past the camera operators who pivoted to follow him, past Lorraine, who reached for his arm and missed, past Victor, who stood but didn't move, understanding on some animal level that whatever was happening was bigger than protocol. Talia stood in the spotlight. Her eyes were still glistening from the performance. She watched this man, this famous, powerful, untouchable man, walk toward her with a face she'd never seen on a judge before. Not critique, not admiration. Something broken and desperate and raw. He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that the stage microphones picked up his breathing, close enough that 22 million people could see his hands trembling at his sides. His eyes went to the necklace first, the silver chain, the pendant, the letters. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every syllable. Talia's hand went to the pendant instinctively, protective. "My mama gave it to me." "Your mama?" Nathan's voice cracked. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, they were wet. "Your mama is Grace Turner, from Memphis. She used to sing jazz at the Blue Note on Beale Street." The auditorium rippled, a murmur that built like wind before a storm. Talia took a half step back. Her expression shifted, confusion, then suspicion, then something colder. "How do you know my mama's name?" Nathan looked at her the way a man looks at the answer to a question he's been running from for 19 years. And then he said it, on live television, in front of the entire country. "Because I gave her that necklace, on Beale Street, in the winter of 2007, the night I told her I loved her." The gasp from the audience was audible on the broadcast. Not dramatic, involuntary. 5,000 people inhaling at the same time. Lorraine Palmer's hand flew to her mouth. Victor Steele sank back into his chair. The cameras, all 7 of them, locked onto the 2 figures standing in that single white spotlight. Talia understood. It happened in stages, like watching someone fall through ice. First, confusion, then calculation, then the terrible, irreversible click
of a truth she could never unknow. I'm your father, Talia." Nathan's voice broke completely. The words came out fractured, swollen. "And I am so sorry. I am so, so sorry." The audience held its breath. The cameras held their focus. The country held still.
Talia didn't move toward him. She didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She stood exactly where she was, tears streaming down her face. And when she spoke, her voice was steady in a way that his would never be again. "You left us." "I know." "She's dying. Right now. In a hospital bed in Memphis." "I know." "And you were here this whole time, sitting behind that table, watching me sing, knowing." Nathan's face crumbled. There was no other word for it. The architecture of composure he'd spent nearly 20 years building, the awards, the reputation, the controlled public persona, collapsed like scaffolding in a high wind. "I didn't know at first," he said. "But I know now. I've known since midnight in Memphis. And I should have said something then. I should have said something 19 years ago. I should have never left."
Talia stared at him. Her chin trembled, her fists clenched at her sides. And then she said the thing that 22 million people would replay for weeks. "I didn't come here to find a father. I came here to save my mother." She turned away from him, faced the audience, stood in that spotlight, alone, shaking, 18 years old, with the dignity of someone 3 times her age.
The host appeared from the wings with an envelope trembling in his hands. The results. The scores had been tabulated before Nathan left his chair. "The winner of Voice of Tomorrow, Season 13, he paused. Not for drama, because his voice wasn't cooperating. "With the highest combined score in the history of this competition, Talia Turner." The auditorium didn't just cheer. It erupted. A sound like thunder trapped indoors. Talia closed her eyes, pressed her hand against the necklace, and whispered a single word that no microphone caught, but every camera saw on her lips. "Mama." 48 hours after the finale, Nathan Hayes landed in Memphis. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. He sat in the hospital parking lot for 11 minutes before he could open the car door. Room 412, 4th floor. The hallway smelled like antiseptic, and the particular kind of quiet that hospitals keep. Not peaceful, just muffled. He stood in the doorway. Grace Turner lay in the bed, tubes in her arms, a scarf on her head, monitors beeping in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. She opened her eyes, saw him. 19 years collapsed into a single look. She didn't gasp, didn't cry. She looked at him the way you look at a storm you've watched on the horizon so long you'd almost convinced yourself it wasn't coming. "You're late," she said. Nathan sank into the chair beside her bed and cried the way men cry when they've held it so long the release feels like violence. Grace reached over and placed thin, cold fingers on top of his. "She has your eyes, you know. I see you every time she sings." "I'm sorry. I know." That was all she said. Grace Turner had spent 19 years alone and didn't have energy to waste on a man's guilt. The surgery was scheduled within the week. Nathan paid everything. The $247,000 outstanding, the full treatment plan, the specialists, the private room. He wrote the check and felt nothing, except the hollow understanding that money was the easiest part of what he owed. Talia didn't forgive him. Not that week. Not that month. She sat across from him in the hospital cafeteria and said, "I'm glad you're paying. That's the right thing. But you don't get to call yourself a father. That word means something. You have to earn it." Nathan nodded. For the first time in his career, he had nothing worth saying. 6 months later, Grace walked out of Baptist Memorial on her own feet. Cancer in remission. The doctors said remarkable. Grace said stubborn. Talia enrolled at Berkeley on a full scholarship, offered the morning after the finale by a dean who'd watched the broadcast with tears running into his coffee. Every Sunday, Nathan flew to Memphis, sat in the front pew at Greater Faith Baptist. He didn't sing, just listened to his daughter's voice fill the room the way her mother's once had, with a power that came not from training, but from something deeper, something inherited, something unbreakable. They weren't a family yet. Maybe they never would be, but they were trying. And trying was more than Nathan had done in 19 years. For now, for Grace, for Talia, for the quiet space between what was broken and what might still be built, it was enough. Some voices are born from pain, but the strongest voices, they're born from love that refuses to die. What would you do if the person judging the biggest moment of your life turned out to be the father who abandoned you before you were born? Drop it in the comments. I need to hear this one. If this story hit you the way it hit me, share it with someone who needs it today. Subscribe and hit that bell. Stories like Talia's don't come around twice.
Man, she didn't come looking for a daddy. She came to save her mama. 18 years old, nothing but a voice and duct tape shoes. And somehow, she just made the whole country cry. Imagine being that strong. I couldn't. That's why I told this story.